guest speaker is Leonard Gilbert. I'm delighted he's here, and he will definitely give out a very good presentation. And thank you, Mr.
Oh, thank you, sir. I'm going to go through some material. It's going to be pretty rapidly, but it'll be very engaging once I start to get into it. So I like to ask questions too and kind of get feedback from the audience. But anyway, my name is Leonard Gilbert, and I'll give you a little bit of background. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been here well over 30 years. I graduated from Morehouse College, math and physics, and then I went on to get my engineering degree from Georgia Tech. I was married. I lost my wife back in 2018. We have two boys, Christopher and Kevin. They were both homeschooled, so we know a little bit about that aspect of it. And I attend a Grace Covenant Church, a good Reformed church in theology. And one of the things that I've learned about looking at the world from a biblical perspective, you have to understand how God operates in order to make sense of what's going on around you. And when I talk about public education, you're going to see why it's such a big deal, because most people don't even think about the implications when you're sending your children off to the public school system. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I just retired from Avery Dennison. I've been a John Birch Society member since 2009, and my hobbies are cycling, fishing, writing, and history. I say semi-retired because I figured if Moses started his ministry at 80, I still got a little ways to go. Now, I want you to look at this statement for a moment. Tell me what you think about it. It says free education for all children in public schools, the abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. Does that sound good?
No.
Okay. Glad you saying no. Okay, now, you know where this comes from?
Hello, make yourself welcome.
You know where this? Anybody know where this is found? It's found in the Communist Manifesto. Now, most people look at this and they read and say, oh, this is kind of a good thing. But then there are some things that are bad about it that I want to bring out about this whole public education thing, or what I consider to be government-controlled education, which is a whole different ballgame. All right. Even though this Communist Manifesto was published like in 1848, basically the idea of education for everyone first came about in Europe. All right. And the reason why it came out of that, there was a Protestant Reformation that took place because people like Martin Luther, John Calvin pulled out of the Catholic Church because they said, no, what's happening here is that the Pope, they've taken the Pope and put him as the authority. And then what that does is undermine the value of Christ, who happens to be priest, king, and prophet. So if you miss that with the Christian faith, you're done. So that's critical. So what they did was they said, we got to pull away from the Catholic Church, because we can't allow this to have an impact on how we educate our children. Because if you do that, then you're going to miss it. All right? So here's what actually happened. The socialists now were actually engaged in our country, all right, believe it or not, even before this manifesto took place, but we were actually engaged in socialist thinking like in the 1800s, 1829, even earlier. Because what had happened was we had the Enlightenment period that followed the Reformation period, and then again when you start centering on man as opposed to focusing on God, it's going to lead to nothing but chaos. And I'm sure you can look around and see what we got today. So anyway, I move right along. The Protestant education, this is important to realize, okay, because the Protestants were the ones that set the stage for education in our country. Martin Luther, 1524, his persuasion of the German princes led to state-supported schools in Gotha and Thuringia, but they also came about compulsory education, so that's when that got started. And then John Calvin said, no, wait a minute, his persuasion was a little bit different. He wanted public education for the same religious reasons, but that's what I'm going to tell you, education is religious in nature, and I'll tell you why you can't escape it. But there was a degree of independence. He said, I don't want the government involved in this. I want it to be like a partnership, because he said once you get the government involved, it's going to turn into a monster. So there were two different schools of thought here, and you're going to see how both of them played out as we go forward. All right? And by the way, with the John Calvin model, He also used church polity as a way of electing officials. So like in the church polity, like you have elders and deacons and things like that, so you had to have certain requirements before you could become a leader in the church. It was the same thing that they applied for when they looked at governors and legislators and stuff like that. So they had a biblical mindset. Even when they looked at how they formed the government, that just fell right into the education realm as well. So it's just going to show you how far straight we've gone from where we started. All right. This is, if you get nothing else out of this, I want you to remember one thing. Education is inherently religious. If somebody tells you differently, they don't know what they're talking about. You can't escape it. Now, if you go to Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So it starts with God. You throw God out of the picture, anything goes. I don't care what anybody tells you. That has to be the case. And everybody believes in something, whether it be in God or don't believe in anything, you still have a belief system. So you can't escape it. Proverbs 4:5, you get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Okay, so God has set the stage for us. And just since I've been reading the scriptures, I got a very good feeling that God knew what he was doing. Now, let's go a little further here. Calvin's education model was adopted. This is when the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Calvin's model was adopted. The charter allowed for the extension of self-government as church members elected ministers and officials for the church. This same principle again was extended to the government and how we operate. All right. Now, the key thing about this that's very interesting is that the way Calvin looked at it was whatever makes me a good citizen or a good Christian should make me a good citizen. So that's the foundation. So I learned my Christian principles. Not only am I getting a good education, but also I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to be a good citizen. So that was his model. All right. But he said the key thing was self-government. Now notice he didn't say the national government. He said self-government. This is critical. All right. Now let's go a little further here. 1720, Boston had more private schools than public schools. By the end of the American Revolution, many places didn't even have public schools. It was all based on people having tutors, homeschool, which is what we did. Some of the colleges founded in Virginia, 1693, Connecticut, 1701, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. Now, here's, again, this is the Protestant influence going out into our society, making an impact on the way we live. The literacy rates, I always talk about this. The literacy rates were important because what happened was that if you look at where we are today about our education, about how we live in a government, it's sad. It is sad. And not only that, when the godly perspective leaves the environment, not only does this go, but now if you become an ungodly society, you got a double whammy on your hand. And that's where we are. Yep. Nobody wants to admit, but we have a very ungodly society. Yep. All right? Now, I'll go a little further here. You can give me an amen whenever you want to. Yes. Got it. Okay. Let's go a little further here. New England had public or common schools that existed with tax support. Some people still wanted some government support, but it was not by popular demand. It was not the popular demand. People were out there, but there were certain people that had this mentality that said, well, wait a minute, what about the poor children? How are we going to take care of these poor children? Well, guess what? When the church was doing what it's supposed to do, there was no child left behind with education. So this whole nonsense about children being left behind with education didn't exist. And guess what? A lot of it wasn't driven by the government. A lot of it was driven by, philanthropy and people helping out because they recognize that whatever we do for society and help these kids out, we're going to have a better society and we can keep sustaining it. All right. The rest of the U.S. educational system were operating with little to no interference from government. This is where we were. Very little. All right. Parents educated their children using home tutors, private academies, and church schools, and more private schools were operating in public. That's what happened. That's where we were. All right. Now, by the way, I just want you to understand this too. When you look at the founding of the United States, the framers left education up to the leaders for like communities, churches, and things like that. They specifically wanted the government to stay out of it. That's why, if you recognize, we don't, constitutionally, we shouldn't have a Department of Education. Constitutionally, it shouldn't exist. But see, this is how far we've gone astray from where we started. And the thing about the poor people, when the people say, "Oh no, we can't do anything about the poor people," well, guess what? If those literacy rates was that high, that means a lot of people were getting educated. All right, and it didn't say whether you were rich or poor. It just said these are the literacy rates. Okay, this is the critical right here: the rise of Unitarianism, and this is why I want you to understand how religion plays a role in this. Okay, it first came out, arose in Europe, direct attack on Calvinism. Now, why was Calvinism? People say, what is the big deal about Calvinism? Well, when you start thinking about Calvinism, it's basically Bible-centered. All it is God-centered instead of being man-centered. Because if it's man-centered, we're going to mess it up every time. And I always tell people, when you look at the Bible and you look at us, you got to conceive just one or two things. Either God didn't know what he was doing, or we messed it up. Now, which one you gonna put your money on? It ain't that complicated. Okay. Now, I worship a God that knows what he's doing, because I read the word and I'm thinking, hey, this is good. All I gotta do is just go by the script. Don't flip the script, everything will be fine. My life turned out just fine. So, man-centered as opposed to Christ-centered. Now, you keep saying education is inherently religious. Think about this now as we go forward. They took over Harvard, 1805. That was a Protestant-based institution. Started to get this man-centered thinking into the school system. Here we go. This is where the fun starts. All right. Now, these are some common myths about public education. All right. First of all, they said it's necessary to stay competitive and prosperity. The American dream, that's the only way you can do it, is through public education. Well, I'm living proof that with my family, and I see some of the other families that are homeschooling, why are we effective citizens? We didn't use the government. Okay? Now, they said it's necessary to promote diversity by bringing all the different races and ethnic groups together. But that's another myth, and I'll tell you the reason why. Because when you read the word, God said we're created in his image. Bingo. Why do we need diversity? So I need to know that, right? That's God-centered. Public education is religiously neutral and preaches no doctrine. How many of you believe that? There's something coming out of there, because I'm talking to these kids, and trust me, it is not good. All right? Since we spend the most money, we can provide the best education. We spend more money on education per pupil than any other industrialized nation, yet we rank near the bottom in academic performance, especially in math, physics, and science. And we throw money at it like crazy. And Brian, you can attest to something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? The neighborhood schools have dedicated teachers and administrators, and they answer to a local school board. Now, you think that really school board has a shot in control of this? Realistically. Okay, this thing is, wait till you see, this is a monster. All right? Let's go a little further. Taxpayers are led to believe that they have control of the school property and what goes on inside.
It's an illusion.
Big illusion. That's all right. The truth is that it is externally controlled by the national education level and all the government officials that talk, say, yeah, no child left behind and what we got to do for children. That's out there, okay? Public education is turned into a monster because it now employs people in all of the towns, the city. This includes the teachers, administrators, school boards, etc. It just keeps growing. And in 1977 now, public education counted for $81 million. Okay?
Billion.
Public education is money. Big money. Okay? Now, with public education, there's also a continual loss of true educational freedom as it once existed. So the more the government gets involved and the more it takes control, guess what? They're going to have control of your children. All right? This is the whole thing about communism, because when they say like a common thing or a common goal, they want everybody to think the same way. And as long as the government can keep growing and to get people to think that, self-government and being self-independent, it's going to be thrown out of the window. Again, you can look around you and see what's going on. It's no big secret. Okay? And by the way, speaking of homeschooling, even the states now, they want a part of what we're doing. They're trying to tell us what tests we got to take. I said, now wait a minute. I'm thinking, if I know my son better than you do, because I'm with him all the time, I know what his skills and strengths are. So you know what we do? We maximize that, because that's what the parents are supposed to do. You teach the child, look at his strengths and weaknesses, and you bring the child up according to the way he should be taught. And we'll talk about a little bit of that in Scripture also. And by the way, the government, that's not the role of the government to do that. It's the parents' role. All right? Now, let me show you just some facts just throw out here. Let me show you how our government thinks. 1970 enrollment was about 45 million students, okay? It declined by 5 million, okay? Now, during that same period now, the number of teachers rose to 2 million in 1970 to 2,197,000. And the total expenditures rose $44 million. Now, the students are going down and the dollars are going up. Now, I said to myself, any reasonable person would look at this and say, wait a minute, something not right, okay? Now, for some reason, 5.5 million fewer students required 135,000 more teachers and $36 billion more. Now, how did that happen? Did we get better? I don't think so. All right? Let's go a little further here. Everybody knows about Horace Mann, right? Well, you know, I'm sure his name has been floated around, but they refer to him as the father of the American public education system. But another prominent figure was also in government. That's what I was telling you about. You see, government officials also engaged in this. It's not just people that are influencing at our level. There are government officials involved in this too. Remember I talked to you about that Unitarian movement? Big on that, okay? He served in the House of Representatives for 5 terms, eventually was elected to governor of Massachusetts. He kept growing, and as he was growing, his philosophy was growing with it. Started to infuse more and more of that Unitarianism into the system. All right. They also had an influence in the legislature, working with Everett to promote his agenda. Now, Horace Mann and some other communists were anti-Christian. They hated Christianity. Because you know why? It was a threat to communism. See what a religious thing is, you can't escape it. They recognized that, so they said, we got to take control and keep these children engaged, because if we can take them, if we can educate them, we got them. That's all we had to do. And trust me, I was a part of the education system. When I came out and started to learn things, I realized how dumbed down I was. So fortunately, God was gracious enough to pull me out of it and look at it and say, wait a minute, we missed the boat here. And don't get me wrong, I knew how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, because I had natural ability to do it. It didn't come from the public education system. All they did was treat us like a social experiment. Forced integration, busing, all that stuff came out, and it was total chaos. And everybody thinks it was such a wonderful thing. It wasn't. All right? Now, let's go a little further here. The real purpose of education for all or public education is so that all children can be indoctrinated. This is what communists want. They want your children. Because if they can get the children, they got you. That's all they need, okay? And this whole idea like majority rules, when did we just hear this? See how it goes? So it's there, it's out there. And then what if I pay for your fair share? Everybody got to kick in. Okay, now, talk about fair share. I paid for my son's education, okay? But yet I'm still being taxed to pay for the school system. And then I got to go get permission to walk around the track at the school system. I said, wait a minute, now I own some of this track. I didn't look at it that way. So that just goes to show you who's really in control, okay? Now, this is right out of the socialist book. Now, let me talk about the biblical perspective here. Now, this is going to be a shocker. Education has always been a private matter.
I'm sorry, I just need you to pay this so she can close out her
Oh,
door.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Hey, Tim, can you handle this for me, please? And I'll get it back out again. Yeah.
2002. I got 2 pennies.
Oh, man, you didn't have to do that.
That's all right, that's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, you got my vote. If you study history, the public school system is a result of the communist influence and another negative consequence of the Enlightenment period. The Enlightenment period, keep in mind now, we become man-centered. God-centered is starting to take the back seat. Okay? A free market system, which is what the Bible supports, but nobody talks about this, works for education the same.
One more time, I'm sorry to interrupt. Does anybody else want any soup and salad bar? No? Okay.
Thank you. A parent, we as parents want our children to get a good education, right? So we do that, all right? We want to pay a reasonable price for it. We all do in the market, okay? A teacher, the same way, they want to make money. But guess what? The market demand will dictate how it goes. As long as somebody else is footing the bill, there's no limits on it. You can't rein it in. That's why it keeps growing. All right? Exodus 20:15, it clearly states that you shall not steal. Now, I tell people this. They said, Leonard, you're paying for that education. I said, no, you're stealing money from me for somebody's education. If you're taking money out of my pocket and you're doing it, I'm doing it, you're taking from me unwillingly, that's called stealing. I don't care how you cut it, all right? But they want to say, oh, it's for the betterment of society. Well, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, I don't see society getting better with my dollars. It's getting worse. All right, now, regardless if it's deemed legal by the state or whatever, secondly, parents are responsible for their children's education. This is important, not the state. That is not the state's responsibility to educate your child. For the Christian, all education should be God-centered. Proverbs 22:6, Ephesians 6:4, Proverbs 19. It's amazing to me how when you read the scriptures and understand how God operates, it just makes life so much easier. We have overcomplicated so many things by taking God out of the equation. It's like we've just thrown everything out. And you know what happened? My grandmama told me a long time ago, sin will make you stupid. And I was there. Took me a while to get out of it, but it finally, the light bulb turned on. Okay. Proverbs 22:6, and I'll read this one. Train up a child in the way that he should go. It didn't say the state train up a child in the way that he should go. It said train up a child talking to the parents in the way the child should go. Okay? And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Parents are better suited for this because they have knowledge of their children. Because I can tell you, people talk about discrimination. Discrimination was a good thing when we were growing up. My mama would look at me and she would see me hanging out with certain people. She said, I don't want you around that boy. He's a bad blood. Don't bring him around anymore. 95% of the time, my mama was right. And it kept me out of trouble. So when people use the word discrimination, I said discrimination is a good thing, people. Okay? Mama did a good job of that, and grandmama did a good job. Don't hang around him. She said, bad conduct, you don't do it. So now, you put all these kids together, throw them in one pot. Don't you know you're going to have some bad actors in there? I had a Sunday school class, and I asked my Sunday school kids, I said, do you think it'd be a good idea if I just let you run around, do whatever you want to do, get no guidance, not education? They said, no, Mr. Gilbert, that would be bad. I said, why? They said, because Mr. Gilbert, we're bad. They know this. How did they know it? Okay, because that's who we are. Nobody has to teach you how to be bad. They know how to be bad. So the parents have to tell them this is what good is, and it starts with God. So you cannot tell me you're going to go to the public education system and get a lesson on God. Ain't going to happen. All right. Let's go a little bit further here. Let me see how I'm doing on time. We're making good time. Okay. Martin Luther said, I'm afraid that the schools will prove the very gates of hell unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures and engraving them in the heart of the youth. That's how important this is. And I'll give you the slides, baby, if you want to. So you don't have to write down. I'll give it to you. Okay. Okay. Now you can see this with our government-run education, so you can see this unfolding right before our eyes. And yet we spent time and time again trying and dying to fix a system that is ungodly from the core. Now you know what I call that? That's a fool's errand. Ain't gonna happen. That monster has gone and it's still growing. All right? So, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. Now, a lot of people say, oh, when that happen in the future? I say, wait a minute now. I said, let's look at the pattern in which God uses in his Bible. God was clear to his people that if you do what I tell you to do, everything's going to be fine. But when they didn't, guess what happened? They turned into hell. Now, I told Brian, I said, Brian, I'll be honest with you. In order for something to exist, it had to be in existence before it turned into something. So to me, I'm looking at our nation and saying, I'm wondering if we're looking at hell right now. Okay, because it ain't get better. Okay, so I said, oh my goodness. And by the way, I want you to know, the government-run schools or public education will inevitably die a slow death. Now, you know how I know this? Because any system that runs contrary to what God has established in his word is going to fold like a cheap suit. And I got history on my side to show it, and I got the Bible, and I got evidence right in front of me to show what's going to happen. And by the way, just another aside, this is another education piece. No country in the history of the world has printed itself into prosperity. But we think that dollar is going to be here forever. And if you look at it, since the inception of the Federal Reserve and how it's gone down in value. And people say, oh, well, inflation's only 3%. I'm like, are you using Bidenomics on me?
That's common poor math.
I mean, I think y'all missed a vote on that. I can give you a whole other lecture on that, but I got to keep moving. Pastor and Arthur Douglas Wilson summarized the following. For over 100 years, Americans have been running a gigantic experiment in government schools, trying to find out what a society looks like without God. No, we don't know that. See how this is coming home? It's funny how that religion always plays a part in this. You can't escape it. You can't do it. Education expert Samuel Blumenfield stated, the plain, unvarnished truth is that public education is a shoddy, fraudulent piece of goods sold to the public at an astronomical price. That's what we got. Let's go a little further. Now, I say this to most Christians, they get a little upset with me. But this is the truth. Not taking control of your child's education or putting them in public schools is being disobedient to what God has called you to do. This is how serious this is. So when I come to realize, fortunately I was around some well-seasoned Christians. I didn't have time for the baby stage. I had to grow up fast. They educated me on the Word of God. Not just touchy-feely, you know, I'm going to do this and read this. But they said, no, Leonard, read it and you got to apply it to your life. That's what God intended. So when I said, wait a minute, I can't just be giving my children up to anybody then because I'm responsible for that. So we took control and we decided to homeschool. They said, well, how did you do that? Guess what? When you start thinking about the next generation instead of yourself, you can do it. But that's how selfish we are. We're thinking about, because if I brought these children and God gave this responsibility to me, and they're his creatures, then I want to be known that I did my best to take care of them. All right? And again, it goes back to saying, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. This is critical. Now, if you think you're giving your child the moral training and letting the public school give them academic training, which a lot of people believe that, oh, well, we're going to teach them all the moral stuff, but we'll let them do the academic training in education. That's another myth. Okay? Because let me tell you something. I learned how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, not through the educational system. I learned because other people were teaching me the things I was deficient in as I was going to the public school system. Like speaking incorrectly and things like that. I didn't know all these kind of things, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm not getting these people that saw what was going on, they were helping me to overcome those deficiencies. That's how I got through it. All right? Now, if anything, I can tell you right now, they're receiving an anti-Christian education. And I know this for a fact too, because I see it unfolding before my eyes. Now, this right now is one of the things I can tell you that's here to record. There's no fear of God being taught. None. And when you fear God, that's where it all starts. Everything starts to come together because you recognize there's a higher power than you, and you have to recognize how that higher power is thinking. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, assemble the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. I didn't make it up. Right there. This is the beautiful thing about Scripture. Jesus Christ is the same today, yesterday, and forever. So all I got to do is pick it up. He doesn't float in the wind like we do. I just said, oh, it's funny how I can pick this up and then 20 years from now it's going to say the same thing. That's a beautiful thing. That's education. All right? Moving right along. You could not have success apart from God. So the Bible says, but you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who has given you power to make wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is this day. So again, any system that starts out with not having God as the premise, again, it's going to fold like a cheap suit. May not be in my lifetime, may not be in my generation, but if God says it's going to happen, it will happen. I can put trust in that. All right, now when people start thinking about wealth, it's not wealth in the sense of being rich. What it means is the whole nonsense of you need an education to get a good job or good pay. That's not what it means here. What it means is that you will look at your potential, what that child is capable of doing, and you help that child maximize that potential. Good example, when Kevin and Christopher they were homeschooled, they were natural in mathematics and some of the sciences. So Mama said, oh, we'll fix this. So she shifted the gears a little bit, and then she concentrated on their weaknesses. Then she said, because they were going to do well with the standardized test, and that was not a problem. The standardized test was nothing. And by the way, standardized tests don't answer everything. And I'll tell you the reason why I'm getting off on a tangent, but I got to tell you this. This is why I'm glad affirmative action is done. Okay? I went to Georgia Tech. At the time I was going, number 5 engineering school in the country. I'm sitting next to guys that scored perfect scores on the ACT and the SAT. And I'm sitting there thinking, how could his brain do that? Well, here's the deal. I'm thankful that that happened. Because you know what? I was kind of a middle of the road type of guy. I quickly come to realize that guy's probably smarter than me. So you're probably going to be working at NASA or something like that. You know what I had to turn to? Doing things with my hands. I had to go to the manufacturing route. Now, I lived a very good life with my manufacturing. That's what God put me in. That's what I was good at. I wasn't good at designing the rocket ships and stuff like that. I was the guy that can turn the wrench. So I maximized my path based on what my capabilities were. If you had put me in the same place that they were in, you know what? I would have failed miserably and then claimed that the state discriminated against me. That's what would have happened. That's why affirmative action, all this other nonsense, you look at people for what they're capable of doing and you help them maximize their potential. That's how you define wealth. Now, okay, I got off on a tangent, but I had to say that. Okay. And by the way, you know that Bible statement says all men are created equal? You know what they mean by that, right? All men are equally bad.
Dead man walking.
Yes.
They heard.
See, it's funny. We don't like to hear these type of things, but when you have to, in order for you to grow in Christ, you have to know where you are relative to God. Because when that light bulb turns on, that's when you go, oh, wait a minute, I gotta straighten up and fly right here. Until you see your need, that's critical. And the church today, I'm telling you right now, there's so much stuff coming out of the church today that just makes me sick to my stomach. I can't listen to it. Because they've gone so far away from what God has intended to do. The church is in some very sad shape. And you know what? They're going to get a spanking too. Because God will chastise his people if you can call yourself a church. I got to say this, Kevin. I'm going to let this go and move on. If you are not delivering the scriptures, you are not handling the sacraments properly, you don't have the right church polity, then you don't have the right to call yourself a church. You don't have the right. Now, I'm not saying there are not Christians in those environments, but you do not have the right to call yourself a church. And I can tell you that comfortably. God even said that in the book of Acts. He laid it out. Here's how the church should be structured. I go look at this, and I go look at the church and I say, wait a minute now, they're not following what I can't call the church. All right? Now, The family, the first government ordained by God. That is the first one. There's three governmental institutions ordained by God. The family, the church, and the state. Your family is your first taste of government. You know why? Because mom and daddy have rules. They have boundaries. Depending on how long you live there, you might have to pay taxes in the form of rent. So they're teaching you all this stuff. So when I leave home, I pretty much know how government operates and I know how to contain myself. This is why the family is so important. You break the family down, as Brian would tell you, all games are off. Okay. The Bible says do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. So if I take my son, send him out to the world, and he gets his basic training somewhere else instead of getting it at home, you know what's going to happen? Chances are he's going to go the way of the moral bad character. And I always tell people that people that have been in the service, you don't train with the enemy. When you go to basic training, you get with your people and you learn how to fight the enemy. Then you go out into the world. But your family is your first priority. Your family got to say, I got to make sure my son or daughter knows what they're doing. Okay. This all makes sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. This is good. Because if it didn't make sense, I'd be nervous.
It explains why I learned to fight inside my family.
There you go.
With my 6 older
There you go.
brothers and 3
So you
older
know.
sisters.
You know. You got conflict, you got everything. Your family,
It was
got
everything.
everything.
Yeah.
This is the beautiful thing about the way God operates. You understand that first criteria starts here. Because once you get through all this, you pretty much know how to self-contain yourself. And you know the other thing about homeschooling, and I got to bring this thing to a close here. Once you develop your child and they understand the importance of discipline, you realize that it's hands-on. You should tell them what needs to happen and it happens. How did that happen? Because they develop the discipline at a very early age. Once you get that discipline, they're self-governing. And this is what Calvin was talking about. Teach your children to discipline themselves and to self-govern themselves, and you will find yourself it's not taking as much time as you think. And by the big families that I've seen that are homeschooling, guess what? The older kids start to help the younger kids. And mom and daddy start to pull back even further. But everybody said, you can't do it. How do you do it? You can do it if you train your child to be disciplined. You can do it. All right, now, let's go on a little further here. I'm getting ready to bring this home. A biblical education is family-centered. Again, I go back to the family, okay? A person reared in school in the doctrine that he has a responsibility to care for his parents, okay? That's why I told Kevin and Chris, y'all have a responsibility to take care of me in my old age. That's just the way it is. That's the way it works, okay? To care for his parents and lead to provide for his children, okay? And to the best of his ability, leave an inheritance of moral discipline and example, as well as material wealth, is a person highly attuned to responsibility. This is from Rushdie. So what he's saying is once you get all this in the home, guess what? That's the key to pulling it all together. That person knows what his environment should look like. And it's not shaped by what's going on around him because mom and dad already took care of that. All right? Now, by the way, in the state education system, the state is the educator. And the state is held to be responsible instead of the parents. So they'll take your child away from you. Oh, you don't know how to do this. You messed it up. That's why we got to educate them. Because you got them all messed up. You got them thinking they can do stuff on their thing. You got them thinking about God. We don't want that. That's what you're dealing with when you turn them over to the state. Now, the very foundation, we talked about this, is anti-biblical. Okay, in a biblical educational system, the state is not a responsible party. The family is, and the man has to a duty to be a competent head of his household. We don't hear that anymore, do we? Okay, and the wife is skilled helpmeet. All the people preach out, oh, you want my wife to stay at home? You want just no, it's not. The husbands have to love their wives, and I can tell you right now, the reason why women are moving up into the ranks is because men aren't doing their job. I know this for a fact because my mother told me when my dad was going off on the deep end, that's a whole nother story, but anyway, my mom looked me right in the face. She said, son, I can't teach you how to be a man. She said, that's what your dad is for. She said, God didn't create me for that. So when I say help me, not putting her down. I'm actually raising her up because that's how much I need my wife to be functional. And if men would recognize that, oh, it would be a whole different ball game. The abandonment of a family-oriented education leads to the destruction of the masculinity. Men don't know if they're women, men get all confusion. It renders women either fluffy luxuries for men or aggressive competitors for men. And that's what we have right now. A woman sometimes won't even allow me to open the door for her. They look at me like, I'm like, yeah, thank you. See what I mean? So these little things that you don't pay attention to them, but that's what's happening. It's slowly, I can't say good morning, Joseph, how are you today? You look very nice. It was a very nice, what's wrong with him? Didn't your mama teach you better than that? Well, obviously not, but anyway. Now, when the state do it, what happens is the man loses sight of his biblical calling. All right, now, public schools are based on false premises, and here's the first one. Welfare works, it doesn't. Socialism works, it doesn't. Parents have insufficient wisdom, and we can teach character without mentioning God. Can't do it. All right. Here's the direct biblical reality. Responsibility works. Freedom works. Parents have more wisdom than politicians. Amen. And to teach character, we must integrate these three factors: the reason for morality, examples of morality, and instruction in morality. You see, these are critical things here. People say, Leonard, why are you always bringing up religion and everything? You do it. You believe what you believe. I'm telling you what I believe. So what you believe is a religion. You just don't think about it that way. But I'm just telling you, I worship the God of this universe. I call myself a Christian. And guess what? God was gracious enough for me to leave me something to work with. You got to change with the wind every time something goes wrong. Do I go no on issue one? Do I go yes and well tomorrow? Maybe we do yes this time. Oh, no could be this. I don't have to worry about that. See, the same for me. Now, here's my summary. For there to be peace in a nation or family, all the children must be taught by the Lord and about the Lord. Okay? Deuteronomy 6 and Isaiah 54. Freedom is thought more, freedom of thought is more important than liberty for liberty than convenience. To have freedom of thought, you must have parental control of education. You cannot have the state doing that for you. In order to have a strong nation, you can't have this dependence or entitlement mentality. You can't do it. All right. All of these things run against anti-biblical. That's exactly what it runs against in the Bible. Here's one that I really like that she also stated. Education is inherently religious. The idea that the civil government can provide a secular education that is neutral is logically impossible. You can't do it. Because everybody's going to inject something in there. If I tell you that I'm a Christian, I would hope you would think if I go and run to an elected office, I'm still going to act like a Christian. Or maybe I'll say, well, since I'm in the office now, it's okay to steal in this environment. But while I'm a parent, I'm going to make sure I straighten up and fly right. Okay? Doesn't make sense at all. All right? A person will value what they pay for. If it's free, you know what? Bring it on. Somebody else is going to take care of it. That's why I contend the civil rights era was more destructive than what people realize. Because they lost sight of responsibility, accountability, and just thrown out the window. All right? Now, I'm getting ready to bring this home, Hal. Many parents have come to the realization that the public school system is a lost cause. Okay, parents are removing their children from public school. And you know what surprised me? There were a lot of black parents doing this. I was shocked. More than what I realized. They're saying enough of this. So that tells you right there, we got a big change going on here. Not only is it better for the student, but it also helps build a better nation. Okay? And this is really interesting because sometimes, I always fuss with Chris and Kevin because I look at sometimes and say, why would you buy that? I just don't understand how you're thinking, okay? But it's a different generation. So one of my buddies at church said, Leonard, you need to do a gut check here. I said, what do you mean? He said, your family is in the same church. You've been in that church for 32 years. Y'all sit in the same pew. We could put your name on that pew. Now, would you rather be doing this every Sunday and having conversations about the Bible? Or would you rather be getting a call from the police station saying, oh, your son down in jail because he's been in a fight or what? I said, well, that's a good point. So sometimes you gotta look at the bigger picture. But it's just that you're a parent. So you're gonna want them to do the things you did because you said, I made that, I've been down that road. Okay? The teachers union has become one of the most powerful forces in the political arena. These people have power. So what we've been doing is, and I told Kevin this, the reason why I get so excited about working with children is because I work with the children and help the parents understand what they can do to help them. And I can tell you right now, I don't think we have anybody at our church that's doing public education. I think every single family in there is pulling their children out. They don't have them in there. And by the way, people say they can't find resources to do this. There are tons of churches that are doing it. The homeschooling movement is big. We learned a great deal when we did it. And when we did that, trust me, the world as I know it changed drastically. And Brian and I talked about this, the Federal Department of Education is unconstitutional, but some people think that's right and it should be enshrined and it is not. And by the way, on the state level, I gotta tell you something. And this is what you and I talked about. Here's my simple mind thinking again. I go and ask somebody about issue 1. And they say, look, we have to start following our Constitution. I said, wait a minute now. If we've changed our Constitution 170 plus times since its inception, and then I look at the federal Constitution, well, 27, 28 times, first 10 the Bill of Rights, I'm thinking, do we really have a Constitution? And they said, look, that's a very good question. And so I got a little history lesson about what happened in 1910 and how all this stuff got in here, and we really messed this thing up big time. Now, trying to get out of this, I don't think it's gonna be easy. But anyway, I'm gonna close.